the director of the Forerunner, and I want to do a quick update on the Ukraine map. It's going to be called Russia-Ukraine Conflict, What's Happening Now? And I want to start off with two quotes. This is from an author that I've been reading, Samuel P. Huntington. I've actually been studying his book on Clash of Civilizations. And I thought these two quotes were appropriate. This was written back in earlier than 1996. The final book was published, final edition was published in 1996. It's called The Clash of Civilizations, Remaking of the World Order. And the first one says, the dangerous clashes of the future are likely to arise from the interaction of Western arrogance, Islamic intolerance, and Sinic assertiveness. Sinic meaning Chinese. And I would add to that also the arrogance of the Western expansion of NATO into Ukraine as well. And there's another quote that he has specifically about Ukraine, which I thought was interesting. The situation, this is like very early in the book where he starts, the situation between Ukraine and Russia is ripe for the outbreak of security competition between them. Great powers that share a long and unprotected border like that between Russia and Ukraine often lapse into competition driven by security fears. Russia and Ukraine might overcome this dynamic and learn to live together in harmony, but it would be unusual if they do. And so that's interesting. I guess I lost my my face here. I'm going to do this. I'm doing this in a different method than I've been doing it before, so just bear with me here. Okay, so this is the deep state map, and the deep state map is this is probably the best map that you can get as far as what's going on at the moment. You see, you log into deepstatemap.live. Oops, hit the wrong button there. And you get, let's go back. This is the, let's let it load here. And get out of this. There's different maps you can use. All right, so since I did this last time, I'm on a higher resolution than I'm at a higher speed as I've usually been. I'm on a faster Wi-Fi speed, connected speed. So hopefully this will be better. What's been happening in the Ukraine conflict is basically advancement of Russia all along the front lines. Okay. In the fall, there were two front lines here. One of them was toward Kupiansk, which is this right here. And then the other one was toward a town called Liman, which is a very small town, also called Krasny Liman by the Russians. And if I zoom in enough, I can find this. Yeah, there it is, Liman right there. So a fairly small town, village, whatever you want to call it. And so what the Russians have done since, I would say, January, February, is that they've united this entire front line into one. So this is the first front line. And I just want to go back in time here. And we're going to go back to January 8th. And I'm going to scroll through quickly so you can see what's happened. And this is since January. And you can see it's just, this is the line right here. This is the Lugansk line. You can see that. And Russia has about 95% of Lugansk at the moment. What the Russians do is they send out these salients. And this is called aggressive defense. What it does is it causes the Ukrainians to attack. And the attacking army actually has a greater success rate. Excuse me, the attacking army has a greater attrition rate. That means that they will lose more forces than the defending army. So what the Russian army does to conserve forces is that they will push out in these little salients and that causes the Ukrainians to attack them. And then what happens from there is they'll send out another line and create a little cauldron. Okay, so that's what's gone on since then. And we're coming into March. This is February. And you can see it's very incremental, but when we get into the beginning of March, you'll see some pushes here. Okay, so that's March 4th. And today is March 9th. So that's where we're at the moment. So this is this long line here. The next line is called Bakhmut, or what the Russians called Artyomsk. And in January, they had completely, in the fall, last year, I'm thinking of Avdiivka, but last year they took Bakhmut. And as no sooner did they take Bakhmut in June, when the Ukrainians, they pushed, they had these two large salients. They came out to where this green area is. And what the Ukrainians did was they began to push back on these salients and made quite a bit of progress during the counteroffensive. The Ukrainian counteroffensive was from June of last year until about November. So let's go back to January just to see what that looked like. And we'll just cover 2 months here. This is what it looked like. And the Ukrainians had been pushing back all this green territory as areas that they retook after the Russians took it. And then that was during the counteroffensive. And then what the Russians did since then is that they pushed back again. So this is the second of the 4 lines I'm going to show you. And one of the reasons why, someone asked me recently, like, why is Putin or why is Russia taking so long in this war? Why are they prolonging it? And the basic reason why is that back in 2014, 2015, there was a Donbass war. It got started, and there was a ceasefire, and they established an administrative line. So the pro-Russian forces were on one side of the line, and the Ukrainian forces were on the other. And then what happened from there was that the Ukrainians dug in for 8 years. They basically took towns like Bakhmut, which had a lot of factories, a lot of industrial areas, cellars, basements, concrete buildings, even a lot of fallout shelters, because these cities were built during Soviet times. And it took a long time for Russia to conquer them. And the main purpose of the Russian army is not so much taking land, but it's demilitarizing Ukraine. In the beginning of the war, it was just to kind of wear down the 200,000 Ukrainian troops that they had on the front line. And the difficulty was these large cities and defensive areas. In the beginning of the war, what the Russians did was they concentrated on creating this land bridge right here. They sent out a salient towards Kiev, one towards Chernigov, and one toward Kharkiv. And I believe that those were pinning operations, so that would occupy a lot of the Ukrainian army up here, and that allowed them to take territory in Kherson and Zaporizhia all the way to Mariupol. And the goal was to cut off Mariupol and take that, which they did fairly early in the war. And then what they did was they withdrew all of their forces in April from Kiev. And then the Ukrainians had a successful counteroffensive in the Kharkiv region and another one in Kherson. Since that time, the Russians took Bakhmut. There was another Ukrainian counteroffensive. That's what I'm going to cover next. The other Ukrainian counteroffensive was along this line right here, and this is called Robotynya. And Robotynya is, I call it a farming village. I don't know if that's accurate, but it's a fairly small village. I don't know if they have any industry there, but it's surrounded by a lot of farms. And so this was during the Ukrainian counteroffensive, this was the major area that they took. And the goal was to try to take Robotynya and push all the way down to Tokmak, and all the way down to this other town city called Melitopol. And it was thought if they could get to Melitopol, that what would happen would be that they would, which is right here, would be able to cut this land bridge. That never happened. What happened instead was that they got ground down pretty fast. The Russians did their active defense, their proactive defense, in which they just they let the Ukrainians throw everything they had at them and defended. And like I said, the attacker usually has the greater losses. So if we go back to January here and look at how things were on January 8th, all right, this is the progress that the Russians have made since then. And nothing really happened that much, but you can see they start to chip away a little bit at the fields toward Robotynya. This is Robotynya right in here. And not a lot happened in January, but when we get into February, what happened was the Russians began to erase quite a few of the Ukrainian gains. And like I said, this was the major push of the Ukrainians during this time. Yeah, so this is like a little gray area here. This is a gray zone, which means that it's neither Russian nor Ukrainian, but just like a battle zone. Now we get into February. Now we're coming into the middle of February. See, the lines are kind of straightening out, going back and forth, and so on. And then as we get closer to March, we're going to see this, not a huge push, but a little bit of push by Russia, in which they were able to take back quite a bit of this area. And once they collapse Robotynya, they'll get it in a little cauldron. Like you see, there's one salient going up right here. And they cause the Ukrainians to attack that. And then they'll come in another direction and capture troops in a cauldron and force them to retreat. If the salients don't work, then the Russians can just make a decision to fall back, and they don't lose that many troops that way. So here we are on March 9th. All right, so the next thing is another success. I don't know if you want to call it a success, but another push by the Ukrainians during the counteroffensive was, I lost this. There's a little area along the river, and this was known as Krinky. And if we zoom on this, so Krinky was taken by the Ukrainians. That was a kind of a big deal for them. I don't know what they were going to accomplish by it, but the idea was to cross the Dnieper, establish a stronghold there, and then I'm trying to find it because, oh, there it is right there. There's Krinky. So what happened back in January is Krinky looked like this. They thought if they established a little stronghold there, that would be a way of, basically getting the Russians to kind of fall back and try to cut the land bridge in a different area. Like start another counteroffensive on this area right here. So the most that they got was this little area along the Dnieper River. This is the river. This is a lot of grassland and stuff like that. There's some smaller rivulets that flow through that. So if you go along the Dnieper River any place, you're going to find smaller rivers along the way. I'm going to go back to, let's see. I'm going to go back to December. And this is what they had in December. So if we go high speed here, actually that will look like they may have had some other territories here, but what happened was the Russians, they basically did a pretty good job at driving them out of Krinky. I'm going to move up to January again because so this would be the Kherson direction, and it's uncertain what the Russians are going to do in the Kherson direction. I think that probably they'll stay put. They'll just try to secure this, and I'll explain what I think is going to happen at the very end of this. Now we get into January. This is how it stood in February. This is when we started to see some of the movement. Get to the middle of February, and basically what the Russians were doing here was they were bombing along the river using guided bombs, which are bombs with these fins that kind of glide in from a long distance away. And after they had bombed them for several months, it got very cold, and crossing the river just became an untenable thing. So they weren't able to receive reinforcements. They got depleted, and they had to move out. Okay, so that's up to today. And this map isn't showing this, but basically, sometimes the pro-Ukrainian, this is a pro-Ukrainian map, but this entire area has been taken back. Yeah, I thought that would show that, but it hasn't been. But okay, the other area I'm going to show you is going to be very simple. This is just, so we have that, we have the Kherson line, the Zaporizhia line, which is this line right here. I showed you that already. That's that area called Robotynya, or Bradley Square. It's called Bradley Square because so many Bradley tanks given by the Germans were destroyed there. So it's just like a big square filled with empty tanks that have been bombed out by the Russians. And I mentioned that this was a huge deal here, Avdiivka, because it's very close to the city of Donetsk. And the Ukrainians have been using that as a staging area to, bomb Donetsk. So I'm going to show you two more advances, and then I'm going to explain what I think is going to happen next after that. But this is what's happening right now, and this is very dramatic. I'm just going to show you the last month because they took Avdiivka in, I believe it was in February. Let me go back 1 month and see what this looked like. So. Yeah, this is the most dramatic movement here. I want you to think of the front line as like a piece of wood that you have to chop through, and the way you want to chop through a piece of wood is to go with the grain. Like, to go with the grain is the weakest part of the wood. Go against the grain is the hardest. And so what the Ukrainians did was when they built all of these front lines, like Avdiivka, this fortified city, it's like a tough knot. And the only way really to chop through it would be to, like I said, you send out these salients, get them caught in a cauldron, and then you bomb. At this point, they were cut off. This is called a tactical encirclement because all of the roads for supplies are cut off. So that's where we left, I think, before the last time that I showed this. Let's go back to January to show you how this entire front line collapsed. Okay, so this will be pretty dramatic when we watch this. And you see, like I said, they send out these little fingers or pointers or salients, and that causes the Ukrainians to attack the Russians, but then they dig in, and then they send out other salients, and they catch the Ukrainian troops in these little cauldrons, which are like gray zones where there's a lot of fighting going on. It's neither Russian nor Ukrainian territory, but it's contested. The Russians have the advantage even when they're attacked from both sides, because the attacker, the actual troops that are moving forward or exposing themselves, are the ones that get hit the most. So at this point, what happened was Ukrainian troops had already withdrawn from Avdiivka, and there were some people left in there. This is now just the complete collapse you're going to see. There's a lot of mining, like a lot of minefields, a lot of booby traps, so this is the reason why it looks a little bit slow, but basically this is already, Avdiivka is already taken at this point. And then we get into February. Now the question is, there's another line that would have been like around this river right here, up and down here. And if the Russians can break through at one of these points, is there a third line and a fourth line and a fifth line? We know that this area was tougher to get through than these lines are. You can see that. It's kind of obvious. And what the Russians are doing is they're moving now in this area several, maybe half a kilometer a day or something like that. But it's pretty dramatic movement. And if they break through the line along these little lakes and rivers up here, that's going to be there's the question becomes like, well, what's beyond that? Like, there's a lot of these little towns. This is not rural, it's not urban, it's more like little villages, suburban, like little villages every few miles. But then when you look at the map, there isn't really that much between here and there. There's like a lot of farms, a lot of steppes, flat lands. And if one line collapses, the Russians can move very quickly. What I believe will happen is that there'll be an attack from Belgorod. From this entire line will suddenly move forward. There'll be an attack by Belgorod. They won't attack the city of Kharkiv, but they'll attempt to catch it in a cauldron so that things are cut off. There'll be civilian escape routes and so on. That's what I believe is going to happen by the summer. And then the last thing I wanted to show you is that the real key to get this whole area to collapse and to take back the rest of Donetsk. This is technically part of Russia, this entire line right here. This is the Donetsk People's Republic. And they've been declared, this purple area has been independent. This is areas that the Russians have taken, and these areas have never been part of Russia as far as military conquest has gone, but as far as the Russian constitution goes, they consider this area to be part of Russia. So this is this is called the Avdiivka line, but then there's another line south of Donetsk, and there are two cities that are very important. I always mispronounce this one. This one is called Novomikhailskaya. Excuse me, I said that wrong. Novomikhailivka. So Novo meaning new, Mikhail meaning Michael, Novomikhailivka. And then there's also Marinka. Marinka has already been taken, so they're moving up this line. All right, you're going to see how dramatic this looks when I show you this. And then the really tough nut to crack has been Volodar, or Volodar, however you want to say it. This is a huge fortification here, and the Russians have gotten as far as this little green area right here, and they've had massive losses trying to take this for over a year. It's very, very tough to get through, but if they break through this line here and also let me see. Yeah, this is the key right here. If they can move all the way out along this line to here, basically what happens is that everything between this line south down to Volodar collapses. Like, they take this automatically without entering it. All right, so I'm going to show you like Marinka and Novomikhailivka. And I know I'm saying that wrong, but Let's just see how this looks in the past few weeks. I'm going to go back to February 8th. So there's a lot of things happening. Well, you can see the movement right there. You just saw the... This is 1 month. This is what's been happening in 1 month. And so there's steady progress. So what's happening right now is the Russian army, the Russian armed forces are moving up and down the front, taking villages, pieces of farms every single day now. And the Ukrainians still have ammunition, but they're about out of it. And there's this big debate going on, as you probably know, in the U.S. Congress. Is there going to be resupply? Is there going to be another aid package and so on? And even if that is passed, this is pretty much already a done deal. By the time that they get these munitions, these weapons, able to train more soldiers, the Russians will have made all the advances that they need to get the rest of Donetsk, and then by extension they'll go after Mikhailivka and the rest of Kherson too. And that might take until the end of 2024, but at that point there could be even a larger collapse, because once all of these fortifications are done, then essentially the Ukrainians are starting over again from 8 years ago, having to build new fortifications out in these areas out here. I told you that the next 4 oblasts that the Russians will probably take will be Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, or what the Ukrainians called Dnipro, the rest of Zaporizhia. Actually, the rest of Zaporizhia is just this area right here. Kherson is this green area. But Dnipro has a little town in it called Kryvyi Rih, which is Zelensky's hometown. That's where he's from originally. Russian area, Russian-speaking area. Mykolaiv and Odessa. And there's also an area of Moldova called Chisinau. And again, don't call me on these pronunciations, but these are not Moldovans, they're not Romanians, they're not Russians or Ukrainians. It's an ethnic minority, and they believe that if Romania comes into Moldova, that they'll lose their autonomy. So they're kind of like they're acting autonomous right now, along with this region. And the Russians will probably, before long, send troops into Odessa to connect this region right here, this land bridge, and all of it, the Odessa region, all the way down to where Romania is, and possibly Chisinau as well, because they have appealed from help. What happened at the beginning of the special military operation was the people in Donetsk People's Republic and Lugansk People's Republic appealed to Russia for help, because they felt that they were going to be at risk, or their security was at risk. And they started preparing armies. So you might have this region of Moldova, this region called Transnistria, fighting in this direction. There's lots and lots of ammunition supplies deep underground in this area right here. So that's what I think is going to happen. The first 4 oblasts that the Russians are fighting for will be taken by the end of 2024. At a certain point, the Russians are going to give the Ukrainians an option. And if they don't take the option, they'll take 4 more oblasts. And then they'll give them another option. And if they don't take that, they'll take more territory. And I think that as far as they will go will be this Poltava region. There's another region south of Ukraine. I think it's called Chermosky or something. What is it called? I should have looked at this more carefully. But that's in the future. Worst case scenario is that the Russians will surround Kyiv again. But I don't see them trying to take what's known as historic Ukraine, which is this central region here, just south of the Dnieper. all the way out to the Transcarpathia. Now this region here is historically Poland, right here, and this region right here is historically Hungary, and this region is historically Romania. So I think that everything like, you know, west of, I'm going to say this line right here, this whole area right here will probably remain Ukraine, but these other cities like, you know, Sumy, Kharkiv, and then this other oblast, which is called Chernigiv, could also go to Russia too. So we'll see what happens. But tactically, pretty much the war's over. There's not going to be a Ukrainian counteroffensive that's going to be effective. It could drag on for a couple more years, 2025, something like that. But I think by like the end of 2024, that the Russians will have what they need, and not only will the Ukrainian military collapse, but the government in Kyiv will collapse too, and there'll be a different president than Zelensky. Zelensky's term is up. He's declared martial law, so he can't. He's supposed to be out of power, but he, you know, if he were to run for president today, there's another guy named Zaluzhny who was just fired by Zelensky as the commander of the armed forces, who would probably take his place, but he was given the job as being ambassador to England after he was fired to get him out of the country. There's some other things going on, like for instance Hungary. You see this is a pro-Ukrainian map because Hungary is the clown here. Hungary has said that the war is over, that there's no possible way that that the Ukrainians can win. There's been some similar statements coming out of politicians in Poland, Slovakia, Serbia, and so on. So this entire thing looks like it's about to tip. I know that I said that, you know, in the beginning of the war, but this is now getting critical for Ukraine, and I think that this is the most dangerous time for the United States because our leaders don't want to admit that, so they might do some very dangerous things. So that's my video, and like, subscribe. I'm kind of working on a shoestring here with my equipment here today, so bear with me. I wanted to make this video though because I wanted to show you what